She slid the folder across the conference table like it was a routine budget report. I looked down at it. The words, "Petition for Dissolution of Marriage," were printed at the top in plain black ink. My name was on it. Her name was on it. 31 years, right there in a manila folder on a Tuesday afternoon. I looked up at her. She was already looking at the board members, not at me. I closed the folder, set my hands flat on the table, and I smiled. Not because I was happy, not because I'd seen it coming, though I had for longer than I care to admit. I smiled because I finally understood something I'd been refusing to understand for almost 3 years. The woman sitting across from me, the one wearing my last name and the title I'd spent a decade building for her, had just made the last move in a game she thought only she was playing. She was wrong. Let me go back to the beginning. Not the wedding, not the early years. Those were good. I don't want to taint them by dragging them into this story. What matters starts about 4 years ago, when the company I'd built from nothing, a regional architectural firm in the suburbs of Charlotte, was doing well enough that I started thinking about stepping back. I was 62 at the time. My knees hurt. I'd had a minor cardiac event the year before, nothing serious, but enough to make my doctor look at me the way doctors look at you when they want you to take the hint. I had grandchildren I barely knew. I had a fly rod I hadn't touched in 7 years. I was ready. My wife had joined the firm 11 years earlier. She hadn't started in any leadership role. She came in managing client relations, which she was genuinely good at. She has a way with people. Always has. She can walk into a room full of strangers, and inside 20 minutes, she knows everyone's name, their kids' names, what they're worried about. It's a real gift. I've always admired it. Over the years, I brought her further in, taught her the business side, included her in strategy meetings, let her take point on some of our bigger client relationships. She grew. I was proud of her. That part is true, and I want to say it plainly, because what came later doesn't erase what was real. When I started talking about succession, her name came up first. It came up because I put it there, but it also came up because she'd earned consideration. The board. We had 4 outside board members by then, people I'd brought in when we took on a private equity partner 6 years prior. They had questions, as boards do. But I advocated for her. I walked them through her track record. I made the case. She became president in the spring. The plan was that she'd run day-to-day operations. For a year or 2, I'd stay on as chairman, and we'd transition fully when the timing felt right. That first year was fine. Maybe I should have noticed things earlier. Maybe I did notice and told myself stories about it. I'm 66 years old, and I've been wrong about enough things in my life that I've gotten humble about my own perceptions, so I'm not going to claim I was oblivious. I'll just say I was slower to accept what I was seeing than I should have been. What I was seeing, my name disappearing. Not overnight, gradually, the way a photograph fades if you leave it in the sun. Our firm had been known in the region for 30 years under my name attached to it. Not because I needed the credit, but because in architecture, in any professional services business, your reputation is the product. Clients hire the person, not just the company. That's how it works. She started presenting to clients under the company name only. Fine, modern. I understood that. Then she started referring to our founding vision in ways that didn't include me. Then the anniversary piece in the Charlotte Business Journal came out, and in the full-page spread about the firm's history, I was mentioned once in a subordinate clause as the original founder. She was in 4 photographs. I was in none. I asked her about it that evening. We were in the kitchen. She was standing at the counter looking at her phone, and I asked her about the article, gently, just as a question. She said, "I didn't write it. They interviewed me and wrote what they wrote." That was all. Back to her phone. I stood there for a moment. I remember the refrigerator hum. I remember the way the overhead light made the counter look very white. Then I poured myself a glass of water and went to my study. I sat in my chair, the old leather one by the window that looks out over the backyard, and I thought about the 31 years before that moment, the apartment we'd started in, the drafting table we couldn't afford a real desk for, the clients who'd trusted us when we were nobody. The years she'd stood beside me at every event, every ribbon cutting, every difficult quarter. I thought, maybe I'm being sensitive. Maybe I'm struggling with letting go. Maybe this is just what it looks like when you hand something over and it stops being yours. I told myself that for a long time. The equity partner had a representative on our board, a man I'll call the investors guy because that's what he was. Sharp, professional, not unkind, but not sentimental. He called me on a Thursday morning, about 8 months into my wife's presidency, and asked if I had time to talk privately. We met at a coffee shop near the office. He ordered black coffee and got right to it. He told me there had been conversations, board conversations, about formally restructuring my role, reducing my voting shares, moving me from active chairman to something called chairman emeritus, which sounds dignified and means nothing. He told me my wife had initiated those conversations. I sat with that for a moment. The coffee shop had a little bell over the door that rang every time someone came in. I remember hearing it twice while I was processing what he'd said. She asked the board to sideline me, I said. He didn't say yes. He also didn't say no. He said, I thought you should know what's being discussed before any formal proposals are made. I thanked him. I drove home. I sat in my car in the driveway for probably 15 minutes before I went inside. That evening, I called my attorney. Not a divorce attorney, my business attorney, a woman I'd worked with for over 20 years, who knew the structure of the firm down to every line. I told her what I'd heard. I told her I needed to understand exactly where I stood, legally, in terms of the business, every document, every agreement, every clause I might have forgotten about. We met the following week. She walked me through everything. And here's where I have to tell you about the consulting agreement. 7 years earlier, when we'd brought in the private equity partner, my attorney had structured a consulting agreement that sat outside the main corporate documents. It was designed, at the time, as a tax efficiency measure, a way to pay me as a consultant, rather than an employee in certain circumstances. It had been signed by all parties and mostly forgotten about, because we'd never needed to activate it. But it was still there, and what it said, in plain language that had been reviewed by everyone's lawyers at the time, was that certain core client relationships, specifically the 11 accounts that had been with the firm since before the equity partnership, the ones that had been with me personally, who'd signed with the firm because of me specifically, those relationships were managed under my consulting umbrella, not the firm's, mine. If I left, or if my role was eliminated, those clients had the contractual right to follow me. Those 11 clients represented about 43% of the firm's annual revenue. My attorney looked at me across her desk with the expression of someone who has been in rooms like this before and knows how they end. They don't know this is still active, I said. Based on what you've told me, she said, carefully. It appears they may have lost track of it. I nodded. I asked her what she recommended. She said I had options. I could bring it to their attention proactively. I could wait. I could consult the clients themselves and see where their loyalties actually lay. I could do nothing and simply be prepared. I chose to be prepared. Over the next few months, I had lunch or coffee or a round of golf with each of those 11 clients. Not to say anything, just to maintain the relationships I'd always maintained. To be present in the way I'd always been present. To remember their kids' names and their current projects and whatever was keeping them up at night. Every one of them asked me some version of the same question. How long are you planning to stick around? I told them I wasn't sure yet. That I was figuring things out. That whatever happened, I'd make sure they were taken care of. Every one of them said some version of, we're with you, whatever you decide. At home, things were quieter than they'd been in years. Not peaceful, quiet. There's a difference. My wife and I had always talked, even when we disagreed, even when it was hard. Now, we talked about logistics, schedules, the Dawn's vet appointment, who was handling the property taxes. I tried twice to have a real conversation. Once I asked her directly if she was happy. In the marriage, with where things were going, with us. She said she was fine. She asked if I was asking because of something specific. I said I just wanted to know how she was. She said she was fine. The second time I told her I felt like we'd gotten far from each other and I missed her. I said it simply, without accusation. I meant it. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she said, I think we just want different things at this point in our lives. I asked her what she wanted. She said, to keep building, to not slow down. I understood then. To her, I was the slowing down. I was the thing she was trying to leave behind, along with everything else that reminded her of who she'd been before she had the title and the office and the 4 photographs in the business journal. I went back to my study. I sat in my chair. I looked out at the backyard. The maple tree we'd planted when our daughter was born was enormous now. You couldn't see half the yard for it. I didn't cry. I'm past the age where I cry about things I can't change. I just sat there until it was dark, and then I turned on the lamp. The board meeting was a quarterly review. I'd been attending them for 22 years. I knew every person in that room. The investors guy, the 2 independent members we'd recruited years ago, the CFO who'd been with us for a decade. My wife opened the meeting. She was composed, prepared, in her element. I'll say that. Whatever else is true, she is good in a room. About 40 minutes in, she paused the agenda. She said there was a personal matter she needed to address, and she wanted to address it directly, with the board present, so that there was clarity going forward about the leadership structure. She reached into a leather portfolio and she slid the folder across the table to me. I looked at it. Petition for dissolution of marriage. I heard one of the independent board members clear his throat. I heard the CFO shift in his chair. I heard the investors guy go very still. I looked up at her. She was composed, almost businesslike. She said she wanted the board to know because it would affect certain governance conversations going forward, and she believed in transparency with the people who'd trusted her with leadership. There was silence in the room. I closed the folder, placed my hands on the table, and I smiled. Not a performance, not a threat. Just the particular stillness that comes when you're not surprised by something you've been ready for. I said, "Thank you for the transparency." She blinked, just slightly. She'd expected something else. Anger, maybe. Embarrassment. A scene she could describe later as proof that I wasn't suited for this anymore. The investors guy was looking at me with something I recognized as professional respect. I said, "While we have everyone here, there's something I'd like to raise as well." I took a document from the folder I'd brought, my own folder, the blue one I'd carried into that room for 2 decades, and I slid copies to each board member. My attorney had prepared them. Clean, clear, tabbed. I said, "This is the consulting agreement executed at the time of our equity partnership. I'd like to make sure everyone has a current copy, since it appears to have been absent from recent governance discussions." The CFO started reading immediately. The investors guy already knew what it was. I'd called him 2 days before the meeting to make sure he had context. The 2 independent members read in silence. My wife hadn't moved. I said simply, "Given the personal changes being announced today, I thought it was important that the board have full visibility into the contractual landscape. My attorney is available to answer any questions." The meeting didn't end well, in the sense that nothing was resolved that day, but it ended honestly, which, in my experience, is usually where things have to start. The divorce took 14 months. I won't walk through all of it. It's painful, and it's boring the way legal processes are painful and boring, simultaneously too emotional and too procedural, full of documents about things that used to be your life together. What I'll say is this: the consulting agreement was exactly what my attorney said it was. 7 of the 11 clients chose to follow me to the new advisory practice I set up. 3 stayed with the firm. Their right, and I respected it. 1 was acquired by a larger company during the process, and the relationship dissolved naturally. 7 clients, about 31% of the firm's revenue, walking out the door. The private equity partner was displeased. There were conversations about breach and fiduciary duty that went nowhere because the agreement was airtight and everyone's lawyers knew it. Eventually, it settled into a quiet renegotiation of the equity terms that I'll just say did not favor my wife's position. I set up the advisory practice in a small office off South Tryon. Nothing fancy. Just a few rooms, a good conference table, and my name on the door. My name. For the first time in 4 years. My daughter helped me hang the sign. She's 34, lives about 20 minutes away, and she'd been watching the whole situation unfold with the particular kind of grief that children have when they see their parents fail each other. She didn't take signs publicly. Privately, she'd told me, about 6 months before the board meeting, that she was worried about me, that I seemed far away. I told her I was fine. She hadn't believed me, and she was right not to. The day we hung the sign, she brought her 2 kids, my grandchildren, 7 and 4, and the 4-year-old asked why Grandpa's name was on a building. I said, because this is where Grandpa works. He thought about that. Then he said, can I have a snack? We got sandwiches from the deli down the block. We sat in my new empty office, no furniture yet except folding chairs and the conference table, and we ate and talked, the 4 of us. It was a Tuesday. The light came in through the windows at that low, late afternoon angle and made everything look warmer than it was. I thought, this is what I was trying to get back to. Not the business, not the clients, not the revenue, not any of it. Just time, space, the ability to sit in a room with the people who matter without thinking about the next meeting. I'm 66 years old. I've made a lot of mistakes. I stayed too long in a situation I should have addressed directly, out of stubbornness or grief or some mix of the two. I put so much of myself into a thing I'd built that I confused the thing for the life, and I let someone else do the same. I don't blame my wife entirely. That's the honest answer, even if it's not the satisfying one. Power changes people. Success changes people. She found something she was good at, and she wanted to claim it fully. And somewhere in that process I became an obstacle instead of a partner. Maybe that's her failure. Maybe it's mine. Probably both. What I know is that the moment she slid that folder across the table, something in me went quiet. Not sad quiet, still quiet. The kind of quiet that comes when a long uncertainty finally resolves into something definite. She thought she was ending something. She was, just not the thing she meant to end. The thing that ended was the version of me who kept waiting for her to see what she was doing and choose differently. That version finally let go, stood up from the table, walked out into the parking garage, got in his truck, drove home, fed the dog, called his daughter, and slept better than he had in 3 years. The clients I kept have become something more than clients. 2 of them have sent their kids to intern with me. One of them, a developer I've known for 18 years, told me over lunch last month that working with me these past 2 years has been the smoothest his projects have run in a decade. He asked what changed. I told him I finally have time to pay attention. He laughed. He thought I was being modest. I wasn't. I meant it exactly. My grandchildren know where I work now. The 7-year-old drew a picture of the building and taped it to my conference room wall, right at kid height. I've had people in for serious meetings. Lawyers, developers, city planners, and every one of them has noticed it. Every one of them has smiled. I leave it there on purpose. It reminds me what the sign on the door is actually for. Not for the clients, not for the business journal, not for any board of directors. For the 7-year-old who drew a building so her grandpa would know she'd been there. That's enough. That's more than enough. That is, if I'm being honest with myself at 66 in a way I wasn't always honest with myself before. That is everything. I've been sitting with this story long enough now that I can look at it without flinching, and when I do, what I keep coming back to isn't the board meeting, or the consulting agreement, or any of the things that turned out in my favor. What I keep coming back to is a much quieter moment, me, alone in my car in the driveway, after the investor's representative told me what my wife had set in motion. 15 minutes, just sitting there. That was the moment everything actually turned. Not the meeting. Not the smile. That parking spot, that engine ticking as it cooled. That's where I had to decide what kind of man I was going to be about all of this. I think about what my wife did, and I try to be fair about it. Because fairness matters even when it's hard. She wasn't wrong to want to lead. She wasn't wrong to want the company to be hers, in some real, complete way. Those are legitimate things to want. Where she went wrong, where it all collapsed for her, was in the belief that wanting something badly enough justifies how you go about getting it, that the destination excuses the route. It doesn't. It never does. What you do on the way to where you're going is exactly who you are. The outcome doesn't wash that out. I'm not a saint. I stayed too long in a situation I should have confronted directly. That's on me. But I also spent 31 years building something with integrity. Not just the business, but the relationships inside it. The clients who stayed with me didn't stay because of a contract. They stayed because of 25 years of showing up, telling the truth, doing what I said I'd do, You can't manufacture that at a rebranding meeting. You can't claim it in a press release. It either exists or it doesn't, and people know the difference. My daughter asked me once, during the middle of the divorce, how I was staying so calm. I told her I wasn't calm exactly. I was clear. There's a difference. Calm is an absence of feeling. Clear is knowing what you're doing and why, even when it hurts. She thought about that for a second, and then she said, I want to be like that someday. I told her she already was, more than she knew. That's what I'd want anyone to take from this, if they're going through something that feels like a slow erasure. Clarity doesn't come from winning. It comes from knowing your own foundation well enough that you're not dependent on someone else's version of you to stay standing. I knew what I'd built. I knew what I was worth, not in dollars but in the actual substance of the work and the trust behind it. No board meeting could take that. No folder slid across a table. What I know at 66 that I didn't fully know at 40 is that character accumulates. Every decision you make, every time you choose the harder, honest path over the easier, comfortable one, it adds up. Not always visibly, not always quickly, but it adds up. And someday, usually when you least expect it and most need it, it's the only thing standing between you and the floor. My grandchildren's drawings are still on my conference room wall. That's where I'm building from now.